Yeah, I mean the big headline is full stack Elm. So
Yeah. Hey, folks. Welcome back to Elm Town. I'm your host, Jared M. Smith. We'll be visiting with Dillon Kearns today, talking about the pages of his history. We will be submitting the form of his journey to the back-end task to the service of the Elm community. Dillon is an advocate for Elm and a teacher at incrementalelm.com. Some of his Elm contributions include the co-host of Elm Radio with Jeroen Engels. He shares tips and insights on Elm at incrementalelm.com. He is the author of several Elm tools, including Dillon Kearns' Elm GraphQL, HTML to elm.com, Elm Markdown, Elm TS Interop, of course, Elm Pages, and more. Dillon, welcome to Elm Town.
Thank you, Jared. It's a pleasure to be on. It is been a long time dream of mine to be on Elm Town, and listening to those puns, now I know how Jeroen feels when I throw him those curveballs in our intros.
Yeah. Well, I figured that was only par for the course. We had to get that in there. Yeah.
Taste of my own medicine, finally.
Yeah, and if folks didn't already know, you may recognize Dillon from the radio on your drive to town today. And I think that's all the puns that I have. Okay.
Not bad.
We'll see. Something might come up.
I'm sure, yes.
So let's get into it. I wanted to ask you, actually, this is one that came from Jeroen, so we'll just kind of get started with that. I paraphrase this a bit, but Jeroen asks, are there any links between your experiences as an agile coach and piano player and how that relates to programming?
Yeah, Jeroen knows me well. And actually it's interesting to look at the link between agile practices and music and between agile practices and Elm. For me, these things are all sort of inseparable because I've just sort of built up my mental model through these parts of my life. I discovered piano when I was 17 years old, which is relatively late for somebody getting into classical music. But it just sort of lit a fire in me in a way that taught me how to have like a sustained interest in something rather than fluttering between several interests, and really focus my interests for a long period of time to develop skills at it. So like music gave me that spark. And then the people I was fortunate enough to study with gave me the techniques to isolate. So when, like, a big part of studying classical music is you need to be able to break something down. And I really got this feeling when I was studying with my teacher in college that I could tackle any problem, because like it felt like the limit to me being able to accomplish something was what I was willing to put into it. The approach I was willing to take, like, am I willing to do the hard work, roll up my sleeves, break things down small enough? If something is not digestible for me, I just need to slice it down thinner. Am I willing to do that? And if I am, I can do it. That's the thing stopping me from doing anything I want to accomplish, not my abilities. And so, like, to me, that was a big mindset shift. It's not like the arrogance of like, I can do anything. It's like, do you really want to do what it takes to do that thing? Right. And that was a very empowering mindset shift for me. And it taught me to sort of take big goals that I wanted to accomplish and turn that energy into sitting down and breaking problems down. Right. And when you look at agile practices, test-driven development, incremental steps, slicing things down, doing the simplest thing that could possibly work, all these techniques. It's really the same concepts. And I learned the value of that in a visceral way by studying music, because it was something I really deeply wanted to master. And so I internalized that connection of really wanting something and then breaking things down into small steps. And I also learned those skills of like, well, what do you actually do? Like going into a piano lesson and having a teacher who's, an incredible master at the instrument, showing you, like, being able to hear exactly how you've been practicing when you play in front of them. And then breaking it down for you and saying, okay, well, are you playing this passage over and over with both hands? What if you played it with one hand? What if you played it at half of the tempo you're playing it now, or a quarter or an eighth of that tempo? Which sounds excruciating, but what would happen? Let's experiment with breaking things down into smaller pieces and see if you can accelerate your learning.
Okay. Yeah, so I know you talked about this some in your episode on Elm Radio, Deliberate Practice.
Yes.
And that's one of my favorite episodes. So I guess one thing that comes to mind is it sounds like it would take a lot of discipline, right, to do that. Like you said, do you really want to take those steps to break things down to that level? Because I think what happens is I have a young son, and his ability to want to like get to the end goal, it's like I want to get there as quick as possible, but it really takes a lot to train yourself to say, okay, if that's where I want to be, I'm not going to get there today. And yeah, like you said, how do I break it down? How do you isolate, like you said, and create that sustained interest so that you can break through those thresholds to get to the next level in whatever you're trying to do.
Right. I like that point you're making about like wanting to just get to the end goal. And that's very much been my experience, like doing agile coaching and technical coaching. I saw a lot of this, I don't want to call it impatience, but it's just like thinking that you'll get there faster by just doing it, right? That like tests are going to slow you down, refactoring is going to slow you down. So this is that sensibility that you develop. And I would, you mentioned the word discipline. And I think that the word discipline means different things to different people. And I have like a mixed feeling about that, because sometimes people talk about a discipline, like martial arts as a discipline or something like that.
Right.
And that concept I have a very positive association with personally. The concept of like disciplining someone, I don't have a positive relationship with that word personally, because to me it makes me think of like what somebody should do, and somebody telling you that something is the wrong approach. And I really like just developing the sense of what causes you to make progress, and then that making that feel good, it feels good when I feel that I'm making progress towards a problem. So whereas like when you first start using test-driven development, it might feel like you're chomping at the bit to just get that code written, and you're like, I know what line I need to write. Let me just write the whole solution instead of writing it step by step as you add test cases that show what is not currently implemented. But then you can develop that sensibility, and that is a type of discipline, but in the more martial arts as a discipline sense of the word.
Right.
So you develop that sensibility where you realize it feels good to write a test. It feels good that you write a failing test, you have that read, and that feels good emotionally. And so I feel that that's an important part of the process, is to develop that relationship where emotionally you get a little endorphin hit when you get a read test. But that's something you can develop intentionally.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I like that. And as you're talking about, the different connotations of discipline, it makes me think about how, some people think of discipline as punishment, right? Like you need to be
Right.
disciplined, right? And I think
Exactly.
that is definitely a negative part of it. But there's also the other side of that is adding a reward for something that you do. And so I think that's what you're saying, right? If you focus on getting a test from red to green, you're creating that reward system and
Right.
training yourself to think in that way.
Exactly. And not because of some externalized notion of what you should do, but because you develop that sense that this this is what progress feels like. And so you build that association that it feels good. So it's kind of like if you're eating food and you're like, oh, pizza is bad and salad is good. And you can sort of discipline yourself to say that these foods are bad or good through some either externalized concept of good or bad for food, or some sort of like shame-fueled notion of what you should and shouldn't be eating that you impose on yourself. I'm not an expert in these things, but my personal feeling about these things is it feels far better to me to sort of start to connect the dots of like, if I eat some food, how am I going to feel 30 minutes later?
Right.
And to start to like not just feel like the dopamine hit of taking a bite of pizza or like eating some M&Ms and feeling really good in that instant, but feeling like as you start to eat some M&Ms, like, oh, am I going to feel good in half an hour? And so to me, it's like really developing like a broader sense of what's going to feel good. And with coding, it's the same thing. Like, okay, I know what it feels like when I jump straight to the final solution, or what I think is the final solution. And I know through experience that I am often surprised that I thought I had the final solution and I end up missing one important detail. And I know that when I go through these small steps, I end up with a more robust result. I end up with a test suite that gives me more confidence. I end up refactoring the code through these tiny steps where it's more manageable. I'm not in the middle of a giant step that I can't now change course in a fine-grained way. So to me, it's about developing that broader sense of how, like, it's almost like extending your nerves to understand the future pain you'll receive from something and wanting to reduce the future pain instead of like imposing some moral system that you think something is good or bad.
Right. Yeah. And again, coming back to the word discipline, if you think about it in terms of self-discipline, right? It's like you are creating what the goal is. There's not some, like you said, external that is telling you, I want to play piano, right? If that is coming from an external place, that motivation it may not be great, right? So,
Right.
But if that's coming from inside and you're saying, this is a goal that I want to get to, then that, again, trying to create a positive spin on discipline, I think you're saying this is the constraint and this is where I'm trying to get to, right? This is the goal. And I know that if I take these steps, I will get to there. Versus, I think you were mentioning that if you just run to the end, right? And I wrote a little bit about this in a blog post where I was thinking of kind of like you're saying with incremental steps, where if you try and run to the solution, you think you're there, but like you said, you're not actually there yet. And that is defeating, right? You're like, oh no, it feels like the goalpost has moved. Really, it hasn't. It's that you sprinted and then you got exhausted is the kind of the metaphor that I was thinking of it. Instead of walking and maybe taking some breaks, finding a bench, stopping, taking a break, evaluating where you're at. Okay, I was going to go to the store. Well, actually, it turns out the store's going to close. Maybe I should, go to this other place now that is still going to be open, and I didn't waste my time running to that store and realizing that it wasn't my goal.
Right.
I don't know
Absolutely.
if that fits, but that's
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, it's powerful stuff. Yeah.
cool. Okay, and so I know you have this history as an agile coach and playing classical piano. And what I'm curious though is, how did you get into programming? Where did that happen? Was that already there in your life, or did that come later?
That's a good question. I mean, so I liked computers a lot in high school. I was always editing videos and you know, doing things in Photoshop and just sort of like hacking around as a user on a computer, you know. So I definitely liked fiddling around with computers, and I also like somehow I had this sense that I really liked logic. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I always like imagined like programming seems like a logic-y thing that you do with computers. and I got to the point with classical performance where, you know, I was like accepted into a university music program, and I was studying, and I was getting to the level, like kind of my goal was to, you know, be able to more or less be treated like a fellow music student rather than somebody who plays really well for having started at 17. And I kind of like got to that point where I was able to just be another music student, and I was like feeling good about the level I reached. But it got to be where the lifestyle of it was you take, you know, you do a short weekend camping trip, and you're like, well, now I'm going to be completely rusty when I come back from this 2-day trip. And then you come back and you feel like you're behind on things, and and it doesn't feel good when you feel rusty. And then you know, this thing that you want to come from passion is now something that you feel some obligation to do, or, you know, and I just realized like, I really love music, but I don't know if I can wake up every day and have this be the professional thing that I'm responsible for. So I decided to change, and I changed to computer science, and basically just started taking all of the university courses for like a computer science freshman, and changed tracks. And it was kind of a shot in the dark, but it turned out very well. Like from the start, I really loved solving problems with code, and I'd never programmed before, but I just kind of made that leap of faith for some reason, and now like doing music as a serious hobby and coding professionally feels so good to me, because I can show up and solve problems. And if I want to get really passionate about those problems and dream about them and think about them on my weekend, I can. Or if I want to go on a vacation for a couple of weeks and not think about code at all and come back to it, I feel perfectly fine coming back to those problems when I come back. So as a lifestyle, that's felt like a really good balance for me.
Yeah, I like that. So one thing I was thinking about when you're talking about this transition is, yeah, you're coming from a place where you felt like it was a not great feeling, you know, a negative feeling when you're away from it, and then coming back and realizing, oh, I don't know what's going on anymore. And what I first thought of with that was, oh, that's how I felt in JavaScript. When I worked in JavaScript all the time,
Yeah.
I could, you know, I it was 2014. I was kind of burned out from work, and I had taken a month or two off. And when I came back, I was like, oh, I just felt so, overwhelmed by it. But I mean, that could even happen over a weekend, or, you get into a project at work, and then, you realize, okay, we need to make some changes to our architecture. You have a new project and you're looking at what's new out there. And it felt like there is so much going on that I just don't know about. I didn't keep up on it.
Yes.
But I don't feel like that in the Elm community.
Yeah. I love that. That definitely resonates with me as well.
Cool. So you were feeling rusty, and you had this sort of realization that you were wanting to make a change. How old were you when this was going on?
Probably like 21 or so. Yeah, 21.
Okay. So, yeah, not too long. I guess then what were the defining moments where you realized this was the thing? Like, was it that where you said like you came back to it and you could go away from it? Was there anything else that really stuck where you felt, okay, I mean, I know you said also, let me just bring back, you said you felt like you could do anything because of those techniques that you learned, right? In those other disciplines.
Yeah. Right.
So maybe you've already answered it.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, yeah. I mean, I went on a summer trip, when I was 21. I went to South Korea, which was, a beautiful experience. It's a place that's very near and dear to my heart. And, yeah, it just was like kind of a soul searching thing for me, just, being on that very peaceful summer trip and then coming back to that feeling of the heaviness of like that burden that I'm not doing enough. And I'm like, that doesn't feel like the work-life balance I want. I just wanted more flexibility, but yeah, as you say, like it did give me that feeling of being empowered to sort of like transfer that sort of meta learning ability to other things. And sure enough, I really believe that there is, if at 17 you came back in a time machine and told me what was going to happen when I was 21, that I was going to decide I wanted to go into programming and I would really like it, I don't think I could have chosen a better path to learn the skills I needed to equip me as a programmer than studying music. Like I really am very grateful to all of the teachers and friends along that path. And I have many close friends still from, who are musicians who, I mean, are just people I'm very happy to have in my life, and who, this lifestyle and this understanding of how to like work hard and break problems down, to me is like so precious, and something that I've really, it forms the foundation for my programming skills.
Yeah, I think that's really neat. So you had this realization, you changed, you got into computer science. When does Elm come in?
Right. So I was doing some agile consulting and technical coaching out in Detroit. I was consulting for a team at Ford, and I discovered Elm around that time. I'd been kind of interested in functional programming languages. Like somehow that was something that piqued my interest, and but I didn't have much exposure to it. And like I had a teacher in college who introduced us to like a little bit of functional Scala, a tiny bit of that, just as like a sort of extra little concept. But it piqued my interest and stuck with me. And I was playing around with Elixir, and I really liked the contrast between Elixir and Phoenix versus Ruby on Rails. And when I first started working out of college doing Ruby on Rails work, I thought I liked Ruby a lot. I kind of fell in love with Ruby, But then I realized, like, I think I like the sensibility of writing domain-specific languages and trying to create abstractions and write high-level code. But a lot of these things that are emblematic of Rails, using a lot of metaprogramming and magic, I actually don't enjoy working with them. It's actually, like, for me, very stressful. I talked a little bit about that in our ADD episode of Elm Radio. I have ADHD, and I think it's a double-edged sword, but it definitely, I really feel it when there's a large cognitive load, when there are a lot of implicit concepts going on and a lot of context. And Rails always felt like that. It's like, wait a minute, what are the pieces I need to be focusing my attention on here? Like, because things could come from so many different places and can be so implicit. So I was really interested in Elixir. And then somebody introduced me to Elm at a little hackathon with some friends I was doing. And then I introduced it to this team that I was working with at Ford, and we started to really enjoy it. And essentially, it really, like, dovetailed with a lot of the things I was trying to coach on this team. Trying to take incremental steps and trying to, making things testable, doing things like dependency injection, not just doing time.now in your view code, but instead extracting something that injects time as a dependency so it's testable, and extracting view objects to make your view logic testable, and practices like this that are, like, a little hard to wrap your head around. In Elm, it's just, there's no other way to do it. And so it was a really natural fit.
Yeah, I like that. So I want to come back to the ADHD thing, but first, when you're at, you've found Elm and you're at this contract at Ford, did you happen to work with Grant Mackey?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you know
Okay.
Grant?
Yeah. Well, I know he gave the talk at Elm
Yes,
Conf,
he did.
Was it 2018?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. About, developing a culture of experimentation. And I thought that was a really great talk. And then I happened to give an intro to Elm talk at Detroit Tech Watch in 2019.
Neat.
And so I got to talk with him a little bit there.
Oh, great. Yeah, Grant is a great guy. I really enjoyed working with him.
Yeah. He's really intelligent and really, I like his demeanor. He really thinks through things and just really easy to get along with. So, yeah. Okay. And so did you introduce Elm to him, or was this independent, or how did that work?
Yes, I introduced Elm to that team, and then Grant joined that team. Yes.
Right on. Okay.
Yeah, so it's a small world, I guess.
Yeah. That's really cool. And so, yeah, you felt like Elm made the standards that you were trying to teach the only way to do things, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I like that. Now, going back to the ADHD, I want to talk about that. I really like that episode as well. My child has been diagnosed with ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think about that a lot. And then the more that, I hear that episode and we talk about, these different things and how you break things down, and that being for me, less anxiety-ridden experience.
Right.
There's one particular quote from that episode, Elm Radio 68, ADD, that I think I really connected with. And it says, this is what you said: one of the big things I notice with my experience with ADD is that if something is not well-defined, it repels me. And then Jeroen asks what you meant by that. And you say, I just want to avoid it. So it's very important to give things clear definitions. And I feel that deep in my bones. I'm like, if it's not something that is clear, I I have to figure out how to break it down, right? Like,
Yeah.
and if I don't, then it doesn't happen. It becomes that, what is it, amorphous blob of
Of undoability. Yeah,
yeah, of
exactly.
undoability. Yeah. And there's a blog post that I read a long time ago, a decade ago at least. It was The Interruptible Programmer by Steve Streeting. I'll put a link to that in the show notes, but he had talked about that and actually had mentioned getting things done and, creating a next step and how to prioritize negatively in these things. And like, I was really struggling at that time to handle all the things, that I was trying to accomplish. And just that alone really helped me to get a handle on that. So,
Oh, cool.
So yeah, I think that was really great. I definitely recommend checking out that Elm Radio episode. But yeah, that's really neat. Thank you for sharing.
It's kind of full circle too, because I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just me, but to me, I see all of these concepts sort of interacting. The breaking things down into more manageable slices, and to me, I just see defining your work clearly as a special case of that, because if you just dive in and do it as this atomic unit, you're just like, okay, work, then it's kind of unmanageable. And you say, well, how do I split that into pieces? Maybe instead of work, I define the work and then I do the work. And now you've split that into something that is more approachable. So you say like, well, can I, and it really is about like having the facility with being able to break things down. So if you're struggling with something, being able to notice, oh, this feels slow or difficult or unproductive. And then, well, what would make it easier? Well, what if, I'm having trouble just doing this thing. Well, what if I just decided what I wanted to do? Could I do that?
So you mentioned a mentor when you were learning to play piano, right? The teacher that was helping you create this pattern, right, of breaking things down, incremental steps. Right?
Yes.
Were there any mentors later specific to programming that you found?
Well, when I was at Ford, I got the opportunity to work with some incredible coaches. We sort of had a team of coaches. We were working side by side to sort of try out some, more iterative and incremental ways of working. And I learned a lot through that experience. Just, there's no substitute for just sitting down with somebody who knows their stuff and working with them. And so I got to do that with some people who I really respect and really owe a debt of gratitude to. So yeah, I learned a lot from that experience. And the people on that team were really incredible people too, who we all sort of, I think, learned a lot together on that experience.
Cool. Okay. So you were working with these other coaches and working with this team. I want to ask you now, because there's a thing that you wrote in Elm, and I think this might relate, called Mobster. It's at mobster.cc.
That was my first Elm app.
That was your first Elm app. Okay. Yeah, that's really cool. Well, first I wanted to tell a story about it because this is when I met you. It was ElmConf 2017. I don't know if you remember this.
Yes, I do. Yes.
But yeah, I was hanging out in this lounge at Strange Loop. I think it was after ElmConf. And you and Murphy Randall, the original host of Elm Town, talking about, how things relate. And then Andre Kuzman, who I built the Elm 3D pool game with. Yeah. You all were hanging out and you were doing some mob programming using Mobster.
Exactly.
In the corner. And I just happened to be hanging out around there, working on my laptop. And what I found was that the Elm folks there were just so kind. You included.
Yeah.
You all were so kind and so inviting. I had no Elm experience. I had never used it. Basically, at that point, I just had this. I bought into the concept of Elm. So I was like, I need this in my life. I'm going to ElmCon to see what it's about. But yeah, everybody was still inviting there, and you all happened to invite me to join you all, basically knowing nothing about mob programming, knowing nothing about Elm, and just kind of getting thrown at the keyboard and like, okay, now, tell me what to type, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was when I was really hooked with Elm. I was like, okay, not only
cool.
is this a tool that fits all, checks the boxes of things that I was looking for, the problems I was trying to solve, solutions to challenges, right? But it also is just this incredibly kind community that, that really accepts anyone and doesn't think twice about it. So thank you for that.
That's lovely. Yeah. That I love that point too. Like you hear people saying in the Ruby community, I think the saying is Mats is nice, so we are nice. Which is, just a great thought. And like, yeah, like the ethos that Evan has created with, like really to me, his like product management insights, his ability to look at a problem so deeply and really understand, like step back from maybe what existing solutions might do and see what are we really trying to do here and rethink that, has really influenced the whole community, and I mean, of course, Richard Feldman as well. Like, I think they really seeded the community in these early days with some incredible conference talks and writing and package designs and pairing with the community. And, I mean, I feel like that is like what makes the community what it is, that we have this in our DNA as a community, these principles of designing delightful tools and packages and, hopefully making it a delightful place to be. So it's really nice to hear that experience.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes me think of the taking responsibility for user experiences.
Yes.
Point in that tweet by Evan.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so Mobster was your introduction, the first app that you built with Elm. But where I thought it tied in here was you're talking about working with these other coaches. And I felt like maybe this idea, this concept of pairing and mobbing would tie into like how you could learn a lot in a short amount of time, still taking incremental steps by doing this process of mobbing and pairing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you
absolutely. Yeah, I think all of these things tie together. For me, mob programming, it really lets you tap into the wisdom of the group, and you see your role in a different way. It's not just writing the code. Sometimes it's more powerful to allow somebody else to have an insight and be silent for a moment when you see somebody starting to have that light bulb go off. So it really makes you think, like, how can I support the shared goal? And you see yourself in this context. And to me, the idea of mob programming, which for anybody who isn't familiar with the concept of mob programming, it's like pair programming, where you have two people working on one computer on one problem, but it's more than two people working on one computer on one problem. To me, it's got lean concepts underpinning it, which is instead of so big batch thinking. Often you contrast sort of big batch mass manufacturing concepts with lean concepts. Sometimes people use different terms to describe it, but to me, agile and lean are really the same thing. People sometimes use the word Kanban. Sometimes a lot of baggage gets dumped onto these terms that to me doesn't really get at the core principles of them. But I really love lean principles. And I think mob programming really gets at the core of lean, where instead of trying to optimize for units producing at all times and reducing the downtime of your valuable units, you know, in the case of an engineering organization, that might be fingers of your highly paid developers at a keyboard. And, you know, in the case of a car manufacturing process, that would be the production line and the die that's stamping out chassis and things like that. These are incredibly expensive pieces of machinery that there's a cost to halting operation of them and not maximizing their uptime. But counterintuitively, if you focus on maximizing that cost, you create a lot of waste. You create a lot of wait time where things are, you know, you want to keep this one expensive machine operating. So you start stamping things out and leaving them in warehouses. And so you don't find out that there's been an issue in the production line until far later. So you're delaying your feedback to when you discover that there's a quality problem. So counterintuitively, by optimizing for that, you can create a lot of waste. And so in lean, you optimize much more for the cycle time, the time from concept to cash, or from starting work on something to shipping something. So in the case of mob programming, it makes you take a more holistic view of the process of shipping software. So what is involved in that? It's not just writing out code. That's one piece of it, but it's pulling in stakeholders to make decisions and drawing on shared context from multiple parties who are involved in these decisions and the history of these systems. And so it actually reduces the friction in all these other areas that often become the bottlenecks. Things like code reviews and waiting on decisions and bringing in stakeholders and things. So by counterintuitively having less people typing on their keyboards, you reduce all of these bottlenecks in the process and they completely go away, and you're building up shared context. So yeah, I love that it kind of flips some of these traditional concepts on its head.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you for that explanation of it and linking those. And one thing I think that it relates to is you were talking about when you were playing piano and, you know, your teacher started asking you questions like, what happens if you play this at halftime or a quarter or an eighth time, you know? And so you're thinking about it in different ways. And I think that's what's happening here, right? You're taking a problem and you're looking at it, you're kind of turning your perspective on it and seeing it from a different light. And then, you know, understanding that we're creating constraints, you know, to kind of go back to a lot of terminology we use, by saying this person's role in mob programming is only to type on the keyboard. They do not type anything that is not told by someone else. So now there's a clear line here. This person's role is this other person's role is to tell them what to type, but then they need to take input from other people. And, you know, maybe their role there's one person that is doing research, or like you said, there's somebody who is a stakeholder. And then, you know, maybe there's somebody who is making sure that everybody's voice is being heard. And I really like when you take and you give these different roles and you create these constraints of like, this is your role, and then mixing it up too, right? Like you throw a wrench in it by saying, okay, now we did that for 5 minutes. We're switching it up. You know, now your role is to be on the keyboard, and my role is to talk, you know, about it. And so, I think that's really, really cool. Do you still use that regularly?
You know, I've been doing so much solo coding on open source lately that I haven't been doing much mob programming at all recently. But this idea you bring up of sort of constraints and sort of gamifying constraints is something that I've been thinking about a lot. And actually, I didn't mention it, but I've actually in the past 5 years or so, I've actually kind of changed from classical piano to doing a lot of jazz improv, and that's been a really interesting transition. And one of the things that is sort of an interesting overlap between, some of these kind of gamifying constraint games that sometimes it can be really fun to do that, like in things like code katas, where you're doing a test-driven development exercise and you can turn it into a game. You can say, well, at a random point in time, if your tests are red, then you have to revert your code to the last green state, right? So just throwing a wrench in things to see what happens, to mix it up. And that's been a really interesting exploration for me with my classical background with jazz piano, is because in classical piano, in a sense, of course, you're trying to have flexibility and the ability to shape your interpretation the way that you want to, right? You don't want to be a robot in classical music, of course, but you kind of decide on an interpretation, and you want to be able to somewhat reproduce the type of sound and articulations and phrasing and tone quality and everything that you're trying to produce. So you try to get really good at like producing these things reliably. And in jazz improv, like if your lines are sounding similar, it's very easy for that to happen, to sort of have a particular improvised style that you stick to. So you need to throw yourself curveballs. And so I've been playing around a lot with these types of constraint games in my jazz piano practice, where I'll just have a constraint and say, okay, longer notes, like more quarter notes or 16th notes, or syncopated rhythms, or alternate harmonies, reharmonization, whatever. You can but you have to be able to just put a different lens on it and experiment and see what happens, and have a facility with trying on these different outfits. And that keeps you, I mean, if you're not trying new things, how are you going to be learning? It's the kind of thing like, do you want 10 years of the same 1 year of experience, or 10 years of unique experience, right? And you do have to kind of mix things up, and you have to be sort of deliberate to achieve that, I think.
Yeah, I really like that. So one thing I want to go to is, you were talking about classical and how that was, something where you had a little bit of leeway, right? But not much. It really made me think of, this is something from a book that I recommended. I just recorded an episode with Wolfgang Schuster, and
nice.
I recommended this book, Kafka on the Shore, by Haruki Murakami. And one of the things that I had said was that he had a history as the owner of a jazz bar. And so a lot of the writing in this, it's a fantasy novel, Kafka on the Shore, but he talks a lot about music in there. And there's this one particular section that just, it for some reason gave me chills, and I think it fits really well here, because he's talking about Schubert, and talking about, when I drive, I like to listen to Schubert's piano sonatas with the volume turned up.
Nice.
And he asks, do you know why? He says, because playing Schubert's piano sonatas well is one of the hardest things in the world, especially the sonata in D major. It's a tough piece to master. Some pianists can play one or maybe two of the movements perfectly, but if you listen to all four movements as a unified whole, no one has ever nailed it. And it says basically that there's always something missing, because it goes on to say the sonata itself is imperfect, and they're struggling with this paradox of trying to create something perfect out of it. So I for some reason that really
nice
stuck in there. So if you haven't read that, I definitely check it out. That's on page 111 of this version of it.
It's a very good sign that they're a fan of Schubert, that those Schubert piano sonatas are brilliant. Yeah.
But then, yeah, so improv, we're talking about that and how now I think that if you take music from this perspective, right, you've been doing this for a few years now, you're playing something, you go away on the weekend, right? You're talking about camping and you're not practicing it, trying to get it so-called, perfect. You come back, this might actually create a new idea, right? Because now it's more creative.
Right.
You have more freedom
Yes.
in the different options and what you can bring to it.
Yeah.
I played some improv music back in the day. I mean, not, just
Nice.
very, I guess not very intentional with how I went about it, but it was basically like a jam band thing,
Cool.
and so I definitely felt like, I could learn something and then go away from it. And then when I would come back a little bit later,
Right.
I would have a little bit of freedom where it was something that maybe I had the muscle memory, but it was a little bit more lax. And because we were in this space where it was, you could play something here and you could kind of try it and see how it goes. And then, you kind of mix in this other thing in there and, wow, that sounds really neat together. I hadn't thought of that, but now that I hear it, this really works.
Yeah, it gives you a new random seed anytime you sort of change something up.
Nice. Perfect.
I heard I heard an interview with Herbie Hancock, who's one of the great jazz pianists, and I really liked something he was saying, that he was talking about like fingerings on the piano, that he said he liked to use unusual fingerings. Like often on piano we don't like to have our thumb on black keys, or we don't like to cross under our pinky finger. We like to cross under fingers that are a little easier to cross over. But he would intentionally practice things like that just to give himself more flexibility when he arrived at an unusual situation, so it wouldn't get in the way of his ability to get his ideas out. And he also talked about needing to have your practice routine and your warm-up routine and everything before a gig. He said, in a sense, like, well, okay, what if you're on tour and you don't get to practice for a couple of days? Now, are you just not going to do the gig? So he talked about being prepared for those sort of corner cases, and it's just such an interesting mindset. Like the whole jazz mindset has definitely been something that's changed my perspective on things in a different way than classical piano. This sort of like really breaking concepts down. So they're almost like pulling my brain in two different directions. It's really interesting.
Yeah, but when you combine them, I think it seems like it's really been powerful.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of bringing this back to Elm, I know you've been working on Elm tooling for a long time.
Yes.
And I think that this can kind of relate there, because how do you build in this time where you're like, okay, now I'm learning, now I'm experimenting, I'm throwing a wrench in there, versus I need to get a thing done. I need to get something from start to finish, or get to that goal.
That's a great question. I mean, as you mentioned earlier, if you if you're walking to a store that's actually going to be closed by the time you get there, then you may as well save your steps, right? So in the same way, when you're doing design work, you don't want to take those unnecessary steps. So if you really spend a lot of time working with design assumptions that haven't been validated, then you might end up walking to a store that's closed and having to retrace your steps. It's actually been very interesting for me doing a lot more API design work in the last year or so, because a lot of my kind of ideas and practices that I built up doing my agile consulting and technical coaching and these sorts of things were about not over engineering, building for a use case, not over abstracting your code, over prematurely generalizing your code, not writing all the bells and whistles in at once, just like, how do we get this feature delivering the value that we need? And in a weird way, when you're doing API design, you do sometimes have to consider a broader set of use cases. So counterintuitively, even if you're trying to do the simplest thing that could possibly work, for an API design, you're not solving for one specific use case. You're solving for something where, so for example, if you're trying to minimize breaking API changes, there's a push and pull there where doing the simplest thing that could possibly work, solving for one use case and shipping it, goes against that idea of trying to minimize breaking changes. So you want to get out in front of that, and you want to, but at the same time, I think you can still use that mentality of trying to, really like a lean approach. Like, I really like this lean startup idea of validated learning. Like, Lean Startup is a fantastic book that essentially is talking about these lean principles of, reducing that cycle time of concept to cash or whatever, but for validated ideas, validated learning. I think the same thing applies for API design. If you have an API design concept, how can you validate or invalidate that? How can you form a hypothesis and test that out as quickly as possible? And so I guess in a way, like that's one big mechanism that I've used to try to do a more agile form of API design, because you don't want it to be a big upfront design, but you kind of also need to do big upfront design a little bit.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it's a balance, right? It's kind of like you're talking about, kind of combining these different approaches and figuring out the balance between them. And this actually ties into a question that I wanted to ask specifically about making Elm pages, because I wanted to know, how do you tackle the challenge of making it simple to start and yet possible to build up to use all those great features, especially with V3, where I feel like the scope is much larger.
That's been a big focus of mine. So one of the things that I've been using as a sort of tool to create that feedback loop for myself is trying to create a short video tutorial. So DHH, the creator of Rails, has this famous build a blog in 15 minutes video where he introduces Ruby on Rails. And actually he really builds it in more like 3 minutes, and then like adds a comment section and changes the styling and adjusts some things in the rest of the time. So I think that like having that constraint of like, okay, however cool your thing is, if you can't show me how cool it is in 3 minutes, or, let's be, a little more forgiving, in 15 minutes, then maybe you should focus on that. Maybe you should take responsibility for those user experiences. It's important to put that in your purview and not just say, well, that's not my problem. Like with Elm, there will be some amount of boilerplate. With Elm, you do have to explicitly wire things in. We can't do magic. We can't do meta programming. We should figure these things out. So like some of the things I've been working on for that for Elm Pages v3 have been the scaffolding tools that are baked into v3. So, much like, building a Ruby on Rails application, the build a blog in 15 minutes, DHH scaffolds out some pages with some forms that let you submit to the server, and then you can, make your database calls from there. So I built some similar tools that help you scaffold out a form, and with a single, you can clone a starter repo. You can run a command to scaffold out a route where you give some form fields for that route. And now you have an end-to-end example where it is doing full stack Elm. It is displaying a form. It has client-side validations that shows if any fields are required and missing. and you can start to modify those and add additional validations to those fields. But it gives you all of the wiring, and it submits that end to end. You receive it in Elm code, and you can perform backend tasks, including the backend task.custom.run API function, which lets you call into Node.js code from your Elm backend. Those are some of the things that I've been trying to do to address, like, making that Elm sweet spot, even though it traditionally hasn't been. Taking responsibility for that full experience of, like, hey, if I want to get a page up and running quickly, what would that look like in Elm? Also, just like the design for this form API, which I went through a lot of iterations and I gave it a lot of design love. That was a big part of it too. Just how do we make that as declarative as possible? Because the way that we've done forms traditionally in Elm, where we have a message for every field, it was just something I looked at and said, this is one of the bottlenecks to being able to give a really great demo and say, like, I want to build a web app where I have an admin panel and I can enter some data into a form, get client-side validations, post that data, and update a database or something, right? Like, if you can't show a really nice demo of doing that, then your framework might not be focused on the right problems, you know? So I was trying to make a really good demo for that.
Okay. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. You've set this goal for yourself of being able to do that and then using that as of where you're trying to get to and how you can make it something that folks can get started with. And then I believe you got paid at some point to work on part of this.
Yes. I am getting some funding to do that, you know, and it's, I also have some GitHub sponsors, and GitHub sponsors are always appreciated to help give me more leeway to do my open source work. So that's been, I've been really grateful for that support.
Awesome. Yeah. And I mean, this really is an ambitious project, but I mean, I feel like the reason you've been able to build all these great things is that you have broken it down. You know, you have taken these incremental steps in your approach in building it and kind of rebuilding it, you know, because I mean that we're on, Elm Pages 2 is completely released and Elm Pages V3 at this point is in beta, correct?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's definitely going to extend the feature set. Do you want to mention what some of those features are?
Yeah. I mean, the big headline is, you know, full stack Elm. So
yeah.
Much like something like Next.js or Remix.js gives you the ability to render a React application that fetches data on a server, could be a traditional backend or a serverless function or edge function. It's able to resolve data on the server, send that over the wire, and hydrate into a React application. Elm Pages V3 allows you to do the same thing. You can do server rendered routes. It's a hybrid framework, so you can also do the statically rendered routes at build time that people are familiar with Elm Pages V2. It's definitely going to take some time for me to get the message out there that there's this new paradigm that I think is a really compelling story. When you introduce a server piece to this framework, I think it gives you some really good conveniences for the developer experience and the user experience. So, for example, you can resolve your data. If you're resolving your data in the same data center where your Elm Pages server-side piece is hosted, then that means you don't have to pay the latency cost of making requests back and forth. So it might seem like, wait a minute, like I have to wait on getting my data before I send out the initial page. But here's the thing. If you consider, let's say you're building a products listing page, something like Amazon or something like that, search results. So you have a search query. you're listing out products matching the search and filters, and you need to display the images for all of the product listing, right? So until you see the picture of all of these products you're searching for, until you see the picture of all of these different shoes that you're filtering on, you haven't really provided a meaningful experience. So in a client rendered page, if you purely have client rendering, no server-side rendering, then what that's going to look like as the life cycle of getting those shoes visible to the user is, you download the CDN hosted static assets of the JavaScript bundle and the HTML skeleton page that has whatever skeleton you're going to render while it's hydrating. Once the JavaScript bundle has hydrated, now you can trigger your request. So it needs to make the initial connection to the server, get the HTML. The HTML is parsing. It sees that there's a script tag. It fetches that script tag. It continues fetching the initial resources it needs, CSS, JS, starts rendering the HTML skeleton. And now, once the JS is hydrated, it knows that it needs to make an API request to get the listing of search results for the current page. So now it goes and makes that request. Once it's hydrated, it waits for the server response to get the API response back. Once it has that API response, it can render the DOM nodes that show the shoe listing. And what does that contain? It contains some image tags with source attributes. So now it needs to go for each of those image attributes and fetch those in order to show the shoe listing, right? So if you compare that with a server rendered version, you are going to get the API request, get the initial request from the user. It's saying it wants to see the search results. It goes and makes all of the API calls, whether it's directly making database queries or calling to an API that's hosted in the same data center. Either way, you're not paying that latency cost when you make that API request. So the idea is it should be extremely fast. So you very quickly resolve that data. You get the initial HTML rendered. So this should all be very fast and performant. So you incur a little bit more of a cost for that initial HTML response. But if you're doing it right, it should be quite fast, especially if you're doing things like proper caching for your API calls and things like that, right? So ideally, you should get very fast resolution of your data. Now you send your initial HTML, which has resolved all of the data for that page, for that initial listing of search results. So instantly, you start rendering the HTML, and the HTML actually shows a meaningful user experience. Now it has the image tag, so the browser can kick off those image downloads faster. So if you're doing it right, this is the performance story, right? Now, this sort of server rendering architecture does require a different mindset. It does require that you're thinking about the latency between where your server rendering is happening and where your sort of data resolution is happening. If there's latency between those, it's not going to be a good experience. So you need to think about that in the architecture. But if you're doing that right, then you can get a really compelling user story. And at the same time, you can also get a simpler developer experience, because that intermediary state of data, the remote data loading state, goes away. So those are some of the things that I find really compelling about this sort of server rendered approach. Not to mention that it's just full stack Elm. So you're communicating with form data that you're declaratively writing a parser for in Elm, and you just have that data on the server side with the same shared client side validation logic that you know is being applied and shared in both places. So to me, the story when you introduce a server becomes quite interesting. Not to mention things like cookie-based authentication, which I believe is a lot simpler than JWT-based authentication.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's That's a really compelling story. And then you also get things like, and I know you've done an episode on Elm Pages scripts, where
Yes.
you can build things that need to go out and perform some task and then return some data, right? And so
Yes.
yeah,
Exactly.
that's really neat too. I mean,
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of things to explore with it, and I'm really excited.
Yeah, me too. I can't wait to see what people build with it. And yeah, as you say, the script, like all these pieces sort of fit together too, because the Elm Pages script uses the same concept of backend tasks and that are used for resolving the initial data on the page, and the follow-up data when you make a form submission is able to resolve a backend task to get data in that follow-up request. I think it's a really interesting model. And we haven't even touched on one of the really exciting features, which the Remix.js team has done a great job sort of talking about these concepts and pioneering them. But Elm Pages has been heavily inspired by their approach to managing form state. I think it's really interesting when you start deriving optimistic UI or pending UI from form state that's managed by the framework. So Elm Pages v3 is really built around a lot of these concepts, which allow you to get the best of both worlds, creating user experiences that kind of have this sort of architecture in mind. This is sort of becoming an industry standard in JavaScript these days. There are all these competing approaches, but they're mostly using server rendering in some form or another. And in addition to that, using progressively enhancing these experiences so that you get, the ability to have like very interactive pages that aren't just like a Rails app, but getting some of the mental model of a Rails app where you can have cookie-based authentication and have a single paradigm for kind of rendering the view and resolving data on the back end, but in a more interactive way where you can do things like optimistic UI, where you're showing items that you're submitting, you can show what it would look like when that item is created in the view optimistically. So there are a lot of abstractions for that. I think it's going to be really cool to see what people build with it.
Yeah, I'm excited. And I think, one of the things about the Elm Pages scripts is that, like you said, that uses the same concepts as the server-side rendering. And I think that can be one of those places where it's like, I don't want to think about the whole thing right now. I want to kind of learn this one concept in here.
Right.
And I think, at least for me, like that's nice to have that as an option of like, okay, let me see this hello world. What does that look like? And, and then kind of build up from there, understand that well, and then move into actually, okay, now, oops, I built a page, like you're
right.
You're kind of
exactly
that approach and then looking at that code and modifying it. So yeah, this is super exciting. In general, what are you excited about these days?
I am very excited about being done with Elm Pages v3. Hopefully by the time listeners hear this episode, it will no longer be beta. It will be a stable release. I'm very bullish on Elm and AI. Yurin and I did an episode on Elm and AI recently of Elm Radio, and I've been playing around with some scripts using Elm Pages scripts to invoke the OpenAI GPT-4 API and sort of feed in some context from types in an Elm application and get it to solve problems through building up a prompt and guiding it through some steps of doing some Elm tasks, and then generating Elm unit tests and giving it the Elm compiler and unit test failure feedback so it can iterate to a solution that is a verified correct solution, not something we have to worry about being hallucinated. So that's definitely an area that I think could be really cool for the Elm community to kind of be able to have some verification techniques around this. I think that could be Elm's strong suit. So it'll be cool to see where that goes.
Yeah, that is exciting because I was talking with a coworker about this after listening to the Elm AI episode, and I agree that Elm is a sweet place for this because it does have these constraints, and we can use that to add more context, like you said, and I think, get better results, and to see how that will work versus like, I had Kevin Yank on recently, and he had written a blog post about ChatGPT and about, how it's, kind of this, can generate these confident but insane, responses.
Right.
But by using Elm, we can create a constraint that, that can help verify and validate and prevent that, create that guarantee.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's one thing, I think if I didn't have this sensibility before, I certainly have it after a few years of doing these Elm Radio episodes with Jeroen. This love for guarantees, like I think it's probably solidified this. I don't know if other people in the Elm community are as obsessed with it as we are. I think a lot of people are also obsessed with guarantees, but I just think that difference between a 99% confidence and 100% guarantee to me is like a really sweet thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's what allows me to sleep at night, I feel like, when I work with Elm.
Me too.
Yeah, that's great. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we move on to picks?
No, it was a great conversation. And I do want to say thank you for picking up the baton on Elm Town. I've been wishing for Elm Town to come back into my feed, and I look forward to getting new episodes every time I see you posting them. You're just getting started with it, but I'm really excited to have a steady drip again in my podcast feed. So thank you for taking the reins on this.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited about it too. I appreciate that, and I have to be thankful for my company that I work at, Logistically, because they sponsor my time to record these episodes and to take care of the hosting and production costs. So yeah, and I wanted to mention that we are hiring. So if you are interested in transportation management, allowing logistics professionals to make better decisions, spend less time on manual tasks, creating efficiency in that process, please drop us a line, elmtown@logisticallyinc.com. I'll put a link in the show notes. But yeah, so I think that for me, it's really nice to see how other people are using Elm, right? And have these conversations that allow us to see, oh, wow, there are people are using Elm in many different ways, and also showing that, there are a lot of companies that are using Elm that have been quiet. So I'm excited to do more with that.
Yeah, the episode that you and I recorded on Elm at $1 Billion Company was by far our most popular episode ever. So there's definitely like an appetite for hearing about companies building businesses on Elm. And sometimes, Elm at $1 Billion Company was such a great headline that, our sort of mantra of tools and techniques in the Elm ecosystem, it was enough to fit it in there. There's like, okay, this is it's not exactly a tool or technique, but this is a really good episode. And Aaron White was an amazing guest as well. But yeah, having Elm Town, this different format, it's a great venue for talking about more of these stories of people using Elm. So I'm really glad that you're doing this.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll put a link to that episode. That's one that you definitely want to check out.
Yeah.
But check out all of Elm Radio, because Dillon and Jeroen are doing an excellent job there. And I wanted to say, your ability to explain those concepts and talk about code in a way that I can follow is really impressive. When I start getting into that depth, I find myself to get stuck and caught up and thinking, well, no, wait, hold on. Let me think about this again.
That's very good to hear, because sometimes it's hard to know if that, like, sometimes we get in the weeds, like talking about the phantom builder pattern and things like that. And we're like, I hope people are following this, but it's good to hear that some of it comes through.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think, it's just enough that if it's something that I don't quite get, I can, go look it up and then listen again. And then, like, oh, okay, now I can visualize that as you're talking through it. So that works for me. Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, are you ready to get on to picks?
Let's do it.
Okay. What do you have for us today?
I thought I would bring a couple of things that have been like very formative for me, and we've actually touched on a lot of these in some form or another. We talked about Getting Things Done by David Allen. Defining your next action, amorphous blobs of undoability. The book, sometimes people talk about how much it talks about paper systems and having 43 folders for your particular file and things like that are somewhat antiquated. I think there's an updated version, but to me, it's really a set of principles for how to get your brain to stop bugging you about something because it trusts that it is in a trusted system. That's the core of it. And so I would highly recommend anyone who's interested, read it with that in mind, just trying to extract that principle from it because it's so good.
Okay. And I want to ask you real quick, what system do you use? Is it paper or is it online?
I have been using Things and I absolutely love it. It's a Mac iOS only application, unfortunately, but if you use those operating systems, it is wonderful. It is like the perfect, for me, level balance of simplicity and power. And it allows you to kind of set aside a set of things you want to focus on for the day, which I really enjoy too.
Yeah. I do that on paper, but I think
Nice.
that would be nice to have that system online,
I really like being able to just like quickly drop ideas in. And for me, like I'm so much like I resist writing on paper, but you got to know yourself. And if paper works well for you and you don't resist it, then absolutely. Paper systems are great too.
Cool. Any other picks?
I also wanted to mention a book called Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. We talked about the idea of external concepts of morality and judgments versus what you want to achieve. And so actually that book has really influenced me in that frame of mind. That's sort of the basic idea. Is to me the core concept is, that it's not very useful to judge people, but rather we should judge how actions affect us. So it's a reframing of that. And I've actually found it to be like a surprisingly relevant frame of mind in open source software, in collaborating with people on software projects, in mob programming, things like that. To me, the term nonviolent communication is actually a bit of a misnomer because it's not about communicating. It's about how you frame things internally. Are you
internal
framing
communication?
things? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, are you thinking about things as like, that's wrong, that's messed up? Are you like, that didn't feel good because I wanted this. So it's just a way of reframing that I've found to be very powerful.
Cool. Yeah. I'll have to check that out. I haven't read that one, or I think I've heard that title though. So yeah, that sounds neat. It makes me think of Stoicism and what I read in there about people's actions. And it does, I guess it has a sense of morality, but it's all based on what I think, what my virtues are, what I think to be the good things for me to do are mine and only mine. And someone else's is theirs. And if they do something that appears to wrong me, they're really only wronging themselves. And that I have to have compassion for that because I also am guilty of that. We come from the same place. We all make mistakes, and to recognize that, and then to look at kind of the what you said, like reframing it, and what they use is the term of, what's in my control. So,
Right.
You talk about, they're wronging me. Well, I could change the way I look at that. Maybe I could say, you know what, maybe they're not wronging me. I think in silver lining in basically everything I do. So it's like, how actually is this benefiting me? So I'm trying
Right.
to change it. And that's really only changing the way that I look at it, but that's what I have control over. So,
Right.
and when I think in that, then it definitely creates peace internally. So I think, in terms of like nonviolence, like it's that you're not combating yourself in a way,
Right.
in how you think. So, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely find it to be more peaceful. Like, and to me, it's so much easier to say, instead of saying, hey, you should read this book, which is like, okay, like it's like, hey, if these concepts sound interesting to you, you might really enjoy this book. I know it's like seems subtle and nitpicky, but it actually is kind of like, why should I read this book? It's like, if like if you have this goal and this concept resonates with you, then I believe this would be a good way to fulfill that need. But like, if it doesn't, then why should you read the book if that doesn't sound interesting to you, right? So
yeah. Yeah, subtlety is important. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, the seeds of the Elm community with Evan and Richard, and thinking deeply and thoughtfully about a solution, and and thinking about having these principles
Right.
of user experience and taking responsibility for that, and how you communicate ties in huge role in
Exactly.
that.
And even how we communicate about everybody should use Elm versus like, hey, if you think that using like typed pure functions with like guarantees about their types sounds interesting, then check Elm out. It's really good for that,
Yeah, for sure. Right on.
And I had one last pick, which is there's a talk by Llewellyn Falco and Woody Zuhl that is, for me, like encapsulates a lot of these ideas about technical practices that I've kind of learned over the years from the sort of software craftsmanship world. The talk is called Practical Refactoring, and it's just changed my mindset about is the point of refactoring, like, do you understand the code so that you can refactor it, or do you refactor the code so that you can understand it? I've started to do more of the latter. I've realized that actually, if you're making simple, boring, guaranteed refactoring steps, ideally with tools that can do them for you in a guaranteed way, but even with small steps and support from a test suite in a green state, not making changes in a red state, things like that. If you're using that approach, then you can actually just start massaging the shape of your code without needing to understand it. You can just say, well, here's like a blob of code. I don't know what it does, but it seems to do something. But I'll understand it better by massaging it out into a function, which I can do. It doesn't change the behavior of it. And with Elm, it's a lot easier to know that this blob of code isn't going to have different behavior if I extract it from this function to another one. So I really recommend that talk.
Yeah, that is a great one. Thank you for sharing that. And actually, I had asked you in an email about some resources, and you had sent that to me.
Right.
Yeah. And I found that really valuable as well.
Yeah.
That's
Wonderful.
great. So yeah, I don't have a pick today, but I do have an ask of the Elm community. And what I'm asking is, if there's anyone that's working on climate change, please reach out to me. I would love to have you on to talk about your work and, get anyone else involved in it. This is the first time I've asked this, but I feel like, kind of to your point at the beginning of this episode about, doing things that you see as a goal in the future, not getting the immediate feedback. You may not, like, you don't eat junk food because you know how it's going to make you feel in 30 minutes. Like right now, the weather here is beautiful. But climate is a long-term view of that. And so I think, if there's anyone out there that is using Elm in a way that can help, I'd love to have you on. We can get, the community involved. And I know people in the community have talked about this with their packages. If you have issues that are related to that, they'll prioritize that work, but I will definitely prioritize that as a voice, as getting that voice out there. So, however I can help, please let me know. I'll put a link in the show notes, but you can email me, elmtown@jaredmsmith.com. Yeah, all right. Well, thanks, Dillon, for coming to Elm Town.
My pleasure. It was so much fun. Thank you, Jared.
You're welcome. Y'all come back now, you hear?
Will do. Anytime.